On August 17th, 1915, a Jewish man was lynched in Marietta, Georgia. Many of you probably know this story quite well. 7 years prior to his death, Leo Max Frank moved from New York to Atlanta to take a job at the National Pencil Company. And as he rose to prominence in the Jewish community there, marrying into one of Atlanta's most prominent Jewish families, American society, especially its southern incarnation, was not so sure about people like Frank. America had not yet articulated a vision for a truly multi-ethnic, participatory democracy like many of us might take for granted today. And anyone's difference was broadly seen as a threat. Against that backdrop, on April 27, 1913, a 13-year-old girl named Mary Fagan was found dead at the factory where Frank was superintendent. Despite strong evidence implicating another employee whom most historians today believe actually murdered Mary Fagan, Frank was found guilty after just a few hours of deliberation and then sentenced to death. After that sentence was commuted by the governor to life imprisonment, Frank was transferred to another prison for his protection, but anger continued to seethe around him. In addition to rampant anti-Semitism and racism, historians point out that the sympathy for Frank from northern media and the outpouring of support from urban elites fueled the populist animus against him. Leo Frank was abducted from prison, and on the morning of August 17th, 1915, he was handcuffed and bound, tied to a tree branch, and lynched. Though some of his murderers trampled on his corpse and sought to cut him up into pieces, his body was returned to New York by train. And after arriving at Penn Station, he was brought to his parents' home on Underhill Avenue in Prospect Heights. A day later, a private funeral was held at his parents' synagogue, Congregation Beth Elohim, in this very place where we are observing Shabbat right now. I live in Prospect Heights, and nearly every day, including today, I pass by that brownstone on Underhill Avenue, and I think of Leo Frank, a Jewish man just about my age at the time of his murder. I think about the injustice done to him, the unfairness of the legal system at that time vis-a-vis Black people, immigrants, and all others. I think of the diffidence of a country trying to make sense of its Jews, and of its Jews trying to make sense of their place in this new kind of country, a democracy, the likes of which Jews had never seen in our millennia-old history. I think of how far we've come as an American Jewish community since that horrific time, and I am reminded that the democratic experiment of America has never stopped being exactly that, an experiment forever in need of deliberate tending. If you visit the CBE Cemetery in Queens, you can see Leo Frank's grave today. And there you'll find his simple headstone emblazoned with the Latin words, Semper idem, meaning always the same. We can only guess that his parents chose that phrase because he was always true to who he was as a good-hearted, innocent man. But that phrase has a bitter double meaning for us 110 years later. As we see a shocking rise in anti-Semitism in our own time, we wonder, is it really always the same? We sang from our Haggadahs this week, V'hi she'amda, proclaiming that in every generation there have been those who have stood against us to wipe us out. And we wonder, is that really true? And as we read the headlines about Jews at the center of national debates, and then wade into dark waters of social media, we wonder again, is this really still a thing? Is it actually always the same? Some version of that question was this year's fifth question at the Passover Seder for many of us, unable to read of our ancient liberation without interrogating the tyranny of today. In all other years, we thought anti-Semitism was the butt of the joke or a thing of the past. But this year, maybe not. That very same night when many of us asked or actively avoided the questions on so many of our minds, you likely know already that an arsonist attacked the home of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who is visibly, proudly, and famously Jewish. The motive of the alleged attacker remains unclear, though we do know that the suspect named Shapiro's support for Israel in a call to police. He was mentally ill, we know this too. But as Yair Rosenberg put it in The Atlantic, attempting to murder an American Jew over the actions of completely different Jews thousands of miles away in the Middle East is textbook anti-Semitism. And in any case, this specific attack comes amidst a national ferment about Jews set against nearly a decade of the normalization of anti-Semitism in corners of the internet and, more troubling still, in public discourse. In recent months, we've seen Elon Musk's Sieg Heil hand gesture on Inauguration Day, behind a podium bearing the presidential seal. We've heard Steve Bannon, after making a similar gesture on stage, telling an Israeli interviewer that the number one enemy to the people in Israel are American Jews that do not support Israel and do not support MAGA, he said. And that the biggest enemy is the progressive Jewish billionaires that are funding all of this stuff. Last month, you may also have seen a news cycle about the appointment of a new Pentagon deputy press secretary named Kingsley Wilson, who tweeted multiple times that, quote, Leo Frank raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl, a claim that has been made by white supremacists ever since his lynching. Much has changed for Jews in America since the Frank case gripped national attention. We know this. We've flourished in this golden Medina, imperfect though it has always been, and we've worked to make it better. But notwithstanding all that we've accomplished here, we must now be vigilant and precise as we seek to address these uses and abuses of anti-Semitism unfolding before our eyes. Over the past year and a half, we've witnessed instances of anti-Semitism on college campuses, which we've condemned from this bema. And as universities are once again in the headlines, facing accusations of mishandling anti-Semitism by the federal government, given who the current government is, who their advisors are, and what they've said about Jews, it is wholly appropriate for us to question their motives and their sincerity as they purport to act on our behalf. Consider again that when it comes to one school over which the federal government has direct control, the U.S. Naval Academy, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth recently ordered that the school library remove books promoting diversity, including one entitled Memorializing the Holocaust, while leaving 2 copies of Mein Kampf on the shelves. We might then surmise that whatever is motivating the current government in its approach to higher education might not really be a desire to protect Jews. In the aftermath of October 7th, Harvard, Columbia, and other elite schools failed to adequately address concerns of rising anti-Semitism in their halls. We know this, and have spoken about it. But as this government now seeks to hold them accountable, many of us have a queasy feeling that this isn't going to end well, or that the stated aim of combating anti-Semitism is merely a cynical fig leaf for an overall assault on higher education and free speech. Last week, Wesleyan University's president, Michael Roth, described the administration's attempt to defund colleges as, quote, a cover for a wide range of agendas that have nothing to do with the welfare of Jewish people. All of these agendas, he writes, from dismantling basic government functions to crushing the independence of cultural and educational organizations, to criminalizing political speech, to legitimating petty presidential vendettas, endanger the principles and institutions that have actually made this country great. In other words, it isn't really about the Jews. And if anything, it's likely to harm us. By naming anti-Semitism as its pretext, the federal government is making Jews the excuse for pursuing an altogether separate agenda. And it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to guess at where this will likely go. When programs are cut, jobs are eliminated, grants and scholarships and research fellowships disappear, the Jews will become a target for blame. Anti-Semitism will never be vanquished by defunding academia, limiting free speech, or endangering other democratic norms. It just doesn't work that way. But as American Jews, we do have experience with what does. As the Leo Frank case made the headlines around the country, in 1913, under the auspices of B'nai B'rith, the increasingly organized American Jewish community founded the Anti-Defamation League, with the stated aim to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. In the years that followed, the ADL joined with an ever-growing alphabet of American Jewish organizations to raise awareness about how a healthy American democracy could protect Jews and other minorities. It invested in anti-bias education, advocating for American newspapers to root out anti-Semitic cartoons and protesting against anti-Jewish stereotypes in official government educational materials. And in the 1940s, the ADL and other Jewish institutions worked hard to combat the rise of authoritarianism here and abroad, recognizing that not only education, but also the safeguards of democratic norms provided the surest pathway for American Jews to flourish. As Yehuda Kurtzer of the Shalom Hartman Institute wrote last month, in contrast to most of diasporic Jewish history in which Jewish safety depended on the vicissitudes of the ruling class, American Jews leaned into the core principles of American democracy as vital instruments to keep us equal, protected, and safe among our fellow Americans. Democracy has always been our best defense against anti-Semitism in this country. And as the American Jewish community has tried to respond quickly to the exigencies of the last 2 years in public life, as October 7th and the war between Israel and Hamas has struck a primal nerve for us as Jews, we haven't always emphasized that point. We've occasionally allowed ourselves to mistake views with which we disagree, namely about Israel, as existential threats. And some of us have wanted to silence them. Now, don't mistake me, there are plenty of documented examples of anti-Israel activities bleeding into anti-Semitism, especially in the last 2 years. But the stakes are too high right now for us to treat every criticism of the Israeli government as a mortal threat to our people. And it's time for the ADL, which has elided the two and applauded the administration's attempts to combat anti-Semitism, to remember why they were created and double down on protecting free speech, due process, and the systems that keep Jews and all minorities safe. Independent of our legitimate attachments to Israel, we need to see the ways in which we are being played right now. In a time such as this, unprecedented in all of our lifetimes, we need to remain focused on discerning what is and isn't anti-Semitism, because it's too pernicious for us to get wrong. In every generation, there have been those who stood against us. So we read in the Haggadah. That famous paragraph describes the salvific power of God, opening with the words, V'hi she'amda la'avotenu v'lanu. This kept our ancestors and us going. The rabbi and scholar of mysticism, Art Green, points out that literally this means she who stood up for our ancestors and for us. V'hi she'amda in the feminine. He explains that the she here is the mystical trait of God known as Binah, one of the 10 sefirot of Kabbalistic tradition. The mothering aspect of God active within the self, Binah, he writes, is the place of tshuva, the rebirthing energy within God and hence within every human soul. She is the one who stands up for us always. Rabbi Green teaches that in times of darkness, the Kabbalist response to such a moment is to dig a deeper wellspring within the self. There is an inner place that is deeper than any of our wounds, he writes, an endless resource from which redemption will yet spring forth. This is Binah. Surely for us, one way of responding in this moment of heightened anti-Semitism must be to become resilient, to find some space within ourselves to feel strong always, and following the Kabbalists. If this interior experience is Binah, then it follows that we will be guided from that place with Binah itself, the Hebrew word for discernment, that unique form of knowledge that comes from the ability to distinguish between, or bain, in the related Hebrew word, between two things. In our case, it will mean distinguishing bain, between what is merely abhorrent to us and what is actually using us and putting us in harm's way. This is extremely hard. It's both intellectually challenging and emotionally taxing. But when it comes to seeing anti-Semitism plainly, we need to try to clear out the noise, show people what is truly threatening us, and form coalitions to combat it. In the years since Leo Frank's murder, we have fought too hard to root out hatred of Jews and build a democracy in which all of us can thrive. And it is that which we must seek to protect, because it is that democracy that protects us. As we move to the conclusion of Passover, considering as we do the mix of our vulnerability and our strength, we carry with us the obligation not just to tell the story, but to understand its lessons in our time. The words "always the same" on Leo Frank's grave echo in our ears, not as a resignation, but as a challenge to condemn where we truly see the ancient hatred of our people rearing its head today. The choice before us is not only to confront what is dangerous, but also to discern what is. Anti-Semitism is too real and too dangerous for us to get it wrong. May we rise to that challenge with discipline and discernment and the faith that we can overcome it together. Good Yantif and Shabbat Shalom.